Just a little bit about what I do too. Currently, I am the Chemical Health Coordinator for Wayzata Public Schools. I've been there for 16 years. I also teach at Metropolitan State University. I teach 3 courses there. I teach substance abuse prevention, skills in adolescent counseling, and issues in adolescent counseling. So those are the 3 courses I teach there. And the other thing that I do right now, I'm always working in prevention. It's just kind of my world all the time. I'm a master trainer right now for the Department of Human Services for 2 of our strategic prevention framework communities, our SPIF-SIG grantees. Do we have any of those in here? Do we have any drug-free communities grantees in here? Okay. All right. So it's similar, different type of grant, but still working towards similar goals. And I work with these communities to help get their grants up and running. So in addition to that, I just love to, anything I can talk about with youth, I like to do that. I've been in my field for about 33 years, in schools for about 26 right now, and my prior world before that, I actually spent 10 years in the Cassie-Manorville School District, so not too far from here, and worked in the federal prison in Rochester, started up their chemical dependency unit, worked a little outpatient treatment, did a lot of training at Hazelden. So a little bit of everything, and I feel so lucky I've been able to do a little bit of everything because I think it's really helped me with my day-to-day work with kids. So that's really what I want to talk to you about right now. I am in the field, in the trenches with kids. I roll up my sleeves. I'm doing everything to help them either get into treatment, transition back to school, work with families, constant referrals from families. And I want to ask you this right now. What do you think is the #1 phone call that people like myself in schools are getting, or counselors or social workers? What do you think that #1 phone call is?
Regarding drugs, you mean?
Yes.
What's the signs and symptoms
Of
of drug abuse?
more specifically,
Or use drug use?
marijuana. Currently, right now, that's the #1 phone call. And it's typically about a male. And unfortunately, the onset of use is much earlier than it was. I'm working with more 9th graders than I ever have before, ever. They trump my senior caseload. And that's sad. You know, so these are some of the things that we're really trying to grasp with and work with. One of the things that I've recently started is I pulled together a group of people in the state that I've worked with off and on for a number of years to sit down with me, and we'll have our 2nd meeting this Thursday, and I'm going to put out an invitation for anybody who would like to join us. We're sitting just kind of having a roundtable discussion about what are the greatest practical things that we can tell parents about marijuana use. Because this is an issue right now that has us so polarized. And the kids feel like they know a lot more about it than we do as adults. They may, but they don't have the right information. And so we as adults have to be on our game, and we have to know that latest research so that we can not necessarily go toe-to-toe with them on that subject, because that's what we don't want to do. But we have to have the knowledge base ourselves. So we'll talk more about that later today. So with that, I think I'll go ahead and get started. And again, like I said, I'm going to have some information that you already know, but I want to make sure that we all have the same knowledge base to begin with today. So I always think it's interesting because I get these questions all the time. Why do kids start in the first place? And there's not any really big, deep-seated reason. It isn't anything that we have to dig too far under the surface for. It's usually just for what we see. Curiosity is a big one. And I ask kids this question all the time. Why did you start? Well, just for fun. And maybe jumping down to the bottom. I was a little bored. But there's one reason up here that I hear more than anything else from kids, and they may not quite say it this way, but it all comes down to it, and that is to fit in. That's really the reason that they do. They feel that there's pockets of groups, and they need to find one to belong to. And usually the group that is most accepting of anybody are the kids that are already using. They really don't have judgments about others, You know, they're openly accepting of any kids that want to be part of that group. So just to fit in is a big piece of it. Also, to feel good, but the other part of that is to feel better. And that is a little bit deeper, and it is deeper under the surface. So we have kids that just want to feel good and kids that need to feel better. One of the things that's so important to know is that because kids use, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to lead to a huge full-blown drug abuse problem. And so for every single child that I work with, I look at them individually and I don't necessarily pit them at any particular spot on the continuum, because not every one of these youth that are going to use are going to have problems. And we know that. And some experience huge problems, and some experience minimal problems. Now, I typically hear that a lot from kids that are using marijuana. But what they don't understand, by the time they're in my office, they're having problems. Because I'm in a building of over 3,300 kids, and I'm only seeing the ones that are having problems. Their issues have bubbled to the surface enough that someone has noticed, and I'm involved. So that's the first thing that I generally have to point out to youth. You would not be in my office of 3,300 kids unless there was a problem. And they kind of get that. They kind of get that. But it's going to vary from individual. Drug abuse and addiction, it's less about the substance, but more about the consequences. And that is another piece that's a very valuable piece of information to share with youth. And of course we do know that there are more substances that are very problematic compared to others, and heroin is one of those right now, and we know that, but I focus more on the consequences that's happening in their lives and put the emphasis on that. And so no matter how often or how little is consumed of a drug, if the drug is causing problems in a teen's life, more than likely there is abuse or addiction. So one of the things that I'm working on after I start to develop a relationship with a child is, where do we need to go next? What's our plan? And I tell them right off the bat that this doesn't mean that today I'm calling your parents and I'm trying to put you in a treatment center. We need to figure out, what are these consequences in your life? And we look at all of these different areas, and we really try to hammer out what kind of changes need to be made. Now we know this is a real critical point for youth, because they're either motivated to do some changes, they haven't quite made up their mind yet, and we look at all those stages of change, and they're very true. And they can be all over those, or they can be really, really standing firmly planted in the ground, or I'm just not going to change. I like using, I want to use. And I think that's the attitude that's very, very challenging for me right now, because I'm hearing that more often than less. Anybody here hearing the same thing? Mm-hmm. Yes, okay. And that is very, very concerning to us, because we don't always have the comeback to say to that. And not that we need one, but it's challenging us as professionals. How do we meet eye to eye with youth that are challenging us in this way, and that are saying to us that I like what I'm doing, I like the way it makes me feel, I have ADHD, it helps me calm down, it helps me sleep, and the list goes on, and it almost makes sense after a while. True? It almost makes sense after a while. And it's when we get to that juncture that we know that we have some significant issues with the perception of harm around certain drugs, specifically marijuana. Now, one of the things I went on the Rice County Coalition website, it's beautiful. You have a lot of good information on there. I really commend you for the website and your Positive Community Norms County, using the Most of Us campaigns. And one of the things that's so nice about that is that perception piece, because we have a very difficult time in prevention convincing others about perception, either way. And the Most of Us campaign gives us a different way to look at what drug use is or isn't. and hopefully will get those kids that are on the fence, because that's what I'm always looking at too, those kids that haven't quite made up their mind yet where they fit in. And I believe that PCN, Positive Community Norms campaign, really helps those children that are on the fence decide not everybody is using. You know, and it's reassuring to them to see that. And hopefully it helps guide their decision making along the line. So let's talk a little bit about who's at risk for addiction. Well, I focus a lot on risk and protective factors because I really, really believe that's what helps us to determine, and we can see that from when children are 2 and 3 years old. We can already determine what risk and protective factors they have within their family, what they have available to them as resources, what they have available to them for skills, and what they have available for them, you know, as they continue to grow and nurture throughout their life. And so these are some of the things that we typically look at as general risk factors that can lead to substance abuse or drug addiction. Family history of addiction, definitely. We know that that's a very high risk factor. I work with a lot of youth that their parents are using too, and it's so important for these youth to understand that even though they have a very high risk factor with the family history, that doesn't mean that that's their sentence. And they need to understand that they're at a perfect point in their life to make important decisions for them. And number one, importantly, is if they choose at some point in their life that they want to drink or whatever they choose to do, that they delay that as long as possible. And that's so important for kids to understand that. And we always have to make sure that we offer abstinence as a lifelong choice for them as well. And I wanted to run this by you because I talk to parents a lot about this, and I want to get your feedback on this too. I've often come across kind of different looks from parents when I say to them, you can offer abstinence as a lifelong choice for your child. And they look at me like, oh, didn't really think about that. And I'll tell you why. We're so busy saying, I don't want you to use, but if you do, this is what I want you to do, A, B, C, and D. What part of that has a teen heard? What did they hear? If you do. These are mixed messages for kids. We have to be very, very clear about what our expectations are and realize that they're going to walk away hearing the but. And that's just developmentally where they are. We all did that too. You know, so it's just how we hear it at what age in our life. And some of the other types of things, traumatic childhood experiences. We know about the ACEs study and talking about trauma in relationship to a number of high-risk consequences that can occur. Mental health disorders such as depression, anxiety, ADHD, early use of drugs, and how drugs are used. I want to talk for a minute about mental health because most of us are seeing, because we're so much better today at identifying high-risk mental health in kids, what we're seeing more often is in a secondary level, we see more of the chemical use, probably more in the elementary and middle school, you're seeing more of the mental health. And somewhere along the line, it's transformed into a CD problem. And what we sometimes forget is that when we unravel that and we go back in time a little bit, we find out that it really roots in mental health. And so I know myself that about 80% of the kids I see have mental health, as well as a chemical abuse or full-blown addiction. So I really emphasize working with our elementary, early childhood on up, and with middle school, offering those resources when we identify them as early as we can, getting them to the people that you use as resources in your community, in your school, and really work on engaging those parents. Parents as partners is so important. It's a very challenging type of relationship sometimes to have with some parents. The extra time that you put into that, nurturing that relationship with a parent, really can make a difference. And I'm coming off of that conversation that I had with a parent last week who just yelled at me up and down because he felt the school was taking over the parenting of his child and didn't understand the laws in our state and really kind of reamed me up and down. And, you know, at that point, you can't really engage in an argument. You just know right then and there where the youth gets some of the risk factors. You know, and there isn't much of an education I'm going to be able to do in 3-5 minutes time at that point. So really engaging and working with the parents on a good relationship, I think, is so important. And I'd say most of my parents that I work with, because we're working with intense issues when we're talking about this type of thing, they're really personal, intense issues. So we have the opportunity to really get to know our parents very well, and so that you have this trust relationship back and forth. And when you have that trust relationship back and forth, you can really start working on some of these risk factors. This just shows a little bit about, this is in a lot of the literature that we see, but I show this to kids, and that's why I want to show it to you, because I do teach science to them. I want them to understand that addiction is a brain disease, and that 90% of it gets its start in adolescence. And when they hear that, they're like, whoa, because developmentally, again, nobody thinks when you're 15 or 16 that you're going to have possibly serious problems as an adult. You don't think that way. So I want them to take a look at a little bit of the science, the biology of their risk factors and their environment. And sometimes when those two are meshed together, it really increases the risk factors, or it can increase the protective factors. Either way. So it's very important for them not only to understand their risk factors, but their protective factors as well. So we approach this more on, you have this going for you, you have that going for you, you have parents that support you in your life, you attend a faith community, you have great friends, and those are really good protective factors for kids, a caring school environment, other adults that care for you in your life, and it's so important for them to know that. Now, this is a question, I always have my litany and my routine of questions that I personally like to ask students, as I'm sure many of you do as well. But one of the questions I find that's very telling to me is I ask youth all the time, what's your passion in life? What's your hobby? Number one, hobby, that must really date me because they don't really know what that is. And you mean, like, do I collect stamps? It's like, no. You know, so I know I really date myself, but then I turn it into passion. What do you love to do? When you have extra free time, when you're alone by yourself, what do you find yourself wanting to do? Maybe you do it, maybe you daydream about doing it, you know, what is it? And a lot of them struggle with that because they haven't quite found that yet, and it could be because they started drug use earlier, or it could be because they really did have some of these passions, but they let it go due to drug use, so it got interrupted, and they're not quite sure how to get back to it. So these are very important types of things to work with our youth and help them get back to that, because this is the reality for most kids. Most of them don't want to be a drug addict. And I know that sounds really kind of simplistic. There are some kids who don't care, but almost every child is going to say, no, I don't see myself being that. I know I'm going to quit someday. And then, you know, so we take that piece and run with that and work with them on that piece. But so there isn't one single factor that determines whether a person will become addicted to drugs. As many of different people that there are in this room today, there's all these different reasons and combinations and times of life and windows that may open or shut for those things to occur. So I want to talk a little bit more, and many of us know this. What teens are using, alcohol is number one, and that's nationwide. And then for most of us around here, what we're finding out that our treatment centers are filling up with marijuana addiction, cannabis abuse and addiction. But for a lot of us in the state, this is where things change a little bit, because drug use can become more regional as far as what's available and what kids are using. And I just read an article in the Brainerd Dispatch. I have a cabin up there, and I took a year's leave of absence one year, and I lived up there, and I worked on a task force for their methamphetamine problem that they were having at the time. And that was in 2005, 2006, when many communities were just overwhelmed by meth use. And the drug task force up there and the great partnerships that they had and the coalitions that they formed did some fantastic work on not quite eliminating, but drastically reducing meth use within their community. And they all but wiped out the home meth labs. But last week what I read in the paper is that there was a huge bust of about between $40,000 and $50,000 worth of about 5 to 8 ounces of methamphetamine. 45-year-old man and a 21-year-old female, busted for that. And so we're seeing that starting to come back to communities, and so that's a big issue there. And now we're seeing heroin more regionalized and localized in certain areas. Now, like any of us, you're scared to death when that really starts hitting your area. And that is another one of my big questions that I ask students right now, and I'll do it kind of in focus type groups, or I'll do it just in individual type of things. And I also teach diversion classes for our kids who've had violations either on or off campus. And I ask the question all the time, has heroin made its way into our building or our community? And I would say 9 out of 10 of them will say no. We haven't really seen it yet. So I do know that we have some youth that are using heroin and have. We had a young man on 2020 a couple of Octobers ago. Maybe some of you saw that. So that progressed more to heroin as he got a little bit older, but certainly started off with pain pills, in the secondary setting. So yeah, we're going to see this a little bit more regional depending where you're at in the state, depending on the drug. So at least in the area that I'm in, again, most of the kids right now are in treatment due to marijuana. And so, and the interesting thing about this is that we really should have our treatment centers filled with kids that are having significant problems with alcohol. True? And we seem to, as a culture and a society, kind of settle for the alcohol thing. And we really have to up our ante about that because of the binge drinking that is a very serious threat to our youth. And so we've kind of accepted this thing about alcohol use, and parents have as well. And now we're looking at marijuana as being more problematic, and that's what we're seeing in treatment centers pretty much all across the state. Hazleton is saying the same thing. They're taking a lot of kids right now with marijuana use. So I already talked about that. Constantly hearing from them that marijuana is harmless, and what has not helped at all is the fact that Washington and Colorado have legalized it, because for kids what that means is that it's legal here. That's what it means. And what they're really trying to tell us that it's coming and it will be. So if it is in those states, then it's really amped up the permission level for them to use in their minds. And it's really amped up the idea that it's harmless. Because why in the world would governments allow this in other states if there's harm associated with it? This is a study that I really like to point out to youth, because they're not going to the appropriate websites to get their information on marijuana use at all. They're not going to SAMHSA, they're not going to the CDC, they're not going to NIDA, they're not going to National Institute of Health, they're not going to any of those websites. They're going to High Times and anything that they can find that substantiates, their feelings about marijuana and affirms what they think. But this is a recent study. Maybe many of you have already seen this, but this was so significant as far as their cognitive ability and what they can lose during that time. And so what this study was really telling us is that kids between the ages of 13 and 18 were the most prone towards having cognitive delayed development, or losing up to 10 IQ points during that time. Now, the other thing I found out, once the person turned 18 and up, marijuana really did not have a significant impact on that age group, 18 and up, but between 13 and 18 it did. And that just goes back to support all of the research that we're learning about brain development during adolescence. It really does support that. And we knew that with alcohol, and now we're even learning more about that with really good studies like this right now. So I always have to put up pictures of paraphernalia. I know many of you have probably seen this, but I work with a lot of parents that have no idea what some things are if they go through their child's room and they go through their backpack. And one of the things that I do at school, I'm kind of on that front line of searching kids and stuff too, so I find all these really unique types of things that kids are using for marijuana, and of course apple cores, they've been around for a while, and just found one of those a couple weeks ago. But the most clever thing that I found about a month ago was a student had taken the outside of an inhaler, used the inhaler piece and used a little piece of tin foil, and then had the rest of the inhaler in his pocket, so he could claim that he didn't use that as paraphernalia. But I thought, after he left the office, I thought, oh, he's pretty clever because he used something that wouldn't be considered paraphernalia, but we were able to figure out that that's what he did. And so kids are pretty clever about what they use, and so something that might look just like normal for some other type of purpose that's legal, kids are pretty smart about what they can use. But these are some of the typical things that we see. A couple weeks ago at lunch, we were talking about some of this type of thing because we just had our canine search. And during the canine search, a couple of cigars were found on a student. And of course, I knew what they were for, but others didn't realize that, yes, that's a blunt, and that they pull out the tobacco and they put in marijuana in that. And so all of us, it's really important that we understand what some of these things are so that we can help parents. Now, a couple things. In Minnesota, the 3 fastest categories of drug use right now, and I added heroin because what we were seeing for the last few years is synthetic drugs and prescription drug abuse, but now regionally heroin is seeing a steady increase across our state and our nation. But Minneapolis, St. Paul in particular, and other pockets around the state. So, synthetic drugs, what are they? Now that we're seeing and hearing more about this, I know I'm getting a lot more phone calls from parents, and they'll call and ask me about what are bath salts, what's K2, and because they're starting to see things written on notebooks of their children, something to be aware of, because that's really an inside glimpse into what their life is and what's going on. And I guess I see this because, like I said, when I'm doing searches, I'm going through notebooks, and when I'm seeing marijuana leaves all over things, and I see words like K2, and I see that they've been drawing pipes and paraphernalia, and other words, ganja, that I know that are marijuana related, that tells me that they're in the office for a good reason. It isn't just by chance that they're in the office. So it's really important that we know what some of these things are so that we can help identify what's going on in the child's life. But now we know it's a felony in Minnesota to sell synthetic drugs as of August 1st, 2012. But it's still there, and I ask a number of kids too. I'm so curious about K2, spice, the synthetic marijuana. And I often ask kids that I know to be that have used marijuana often. I ask them, have you segued to synthetic marijuana? And I don't like to use the word most, many, and a lot, because that means different things to us. But if I put more of a number to it, 7 out of 10 kids will say, yes, I have at least tried it. Now, of that 7, 5 of those will say, I'll never do it again. So does that fit with a little bit of maybe what you're seeing here as well? Yeah. Because it's not a pleasant high for them, and it was scary. It took them in directions that they weren't planning to go. And many of us refer to it as, bless you, as marijuana on steroids. And kids get that because it's like, yes, that's what it was like. And for some, it was a real panic type of feeling with them, maybe more aggressive than what they typically are. And yes, it was a longer type of high, but it wasn't one that they really enjoyed. But 420, for students in our state, it's really, really significant. In others, not so much. But so on April 20th, kids use that day as a smoking marijuana holiday, and do all the writing in your school newsletters that you can. Put something out in the school letters, the community newspapers, and students at my schools hate me during that time because I'm publishing all kinds of things and I'm wrecking their fun. And you know, but we get kids that skip school. A lot of schools are there. You know, kids are skipping. They're coming high. And a lot of teachers, they need to know this because they're not always aware during their first period or first block classes that kids are coming high to school. Now, 420 is on the weekend this year. Hallelujah. But some of them will start the holiday the day before, on Friday. So please be aware of that because kids pass down that legend and from year to year, and parents are not in tune with that. Get the word out, and now is the time to do it. So synthetic marijuana is known as K2 or spice. There's a whole lot of different other names for it too. Bath salts, they're either snorted or ingested or injected. They can do that as well. And so bath salts can still be ordered over the internet, although kids are getting access to those without the use of the internet, as we've kind of discovered already that it's still available. And parents wouldn't really they wouldn't probably know to look for these types of things because I really don't think a lot of parents understand what synthetic drugs are. So a little bit about the effects of K2. The onset is about 3 to 5 minutes in the duration, and it depends on these chemicals that are involved. It can be anywhere from 1 to 8 hours. And it's different from K2. It has different from bath salts and those types of things because it has a different type of effect. This is more about paranoia, a little dysphoria, delusions. It is somewhat hallucinogenic, and kids that I have talked to have reported some of that agitation, a little bit more aggressive feelings than what maybe would be normal to their personality. And we really don't know what the long-term effects are on the brain and body because we really haven't had that opportunity to study that and research that over a length of time. But bath salts, they act more as a stimulant. Very dangerous. Man-made chemicals related to amphetamines. And these are highly addictive substances. And they can be injected, and we're starting to see more injection with that. Mild euphoria, manic, and it's also hallucinogenic as well. And I actually haven't really, I don't think, at least what I can recall right now, I don't think I've talked with any youth that have taken bath salts, more the K2, the synthetic marijuana. Okay, prescription drug abuse. This problem continues to grow with us. It continues to grow and grow and grow. And I'm going to tell you how I really started to discover that it was a problem in the area that I work and with surrounding schools. I started noticing it was more around MCA testing time. And I was called to the nurse's office because a student who I did not know actually asked for me to meet him there, and he told me straight out that he took Adderall to get prepared for the test. And he was unprepared for the feelings that it would have on his body, and that his heart was racing, and he was really quite scared. So, you know, we had to call his parents and get him some medical attention. But this is what kids are connecting with. They're connecting test taking, trying to prepare themselves more readily for test, for studying, for achieving better academic grades with Adderall and other ADHD drugs. And this is bad news for our kids. And we know that it's been a very distressing situation on college campuses. And a lot of times when we see these big things happen on college campuses, it's only a matter of time before they trickle into high schools. And so we're seeing this. I'm seeing more ninth graders selling Adderall than ever before. And ninth grade boys don't really know what they're doing with that. And not that I want them to, but they're pretty unsophisticated, stand by the locker bank and exchange right in front of the camera. And they've learned that they can make a few bucks for doing it. And the sad part about this is, as well, as a couple of them that we've had to try to work with, economically they're really struggling as a family. There may have been a recent divorce in the family or a parent that's been incarcerated, and the youth is trying to make a couple of extra bucks. And that's the sad piece about that. And so it isn't always about the use themselves, it's about making some money too. But all in all, what I am hearing more is that more kids are probably using it than what we are aware of, and that it's pretty easy to access. And what that means is that we need tighter controls from parents as far as administering that drug, a controlled substance, to their kids. And we really need parents to understand that. Even if they don't think their child is even close to doing something like that, because we know how persuasive others can be. If kids find out that somebody else takes ADHD medication and kids really want to fit and belong, that might be the shoe-in to fit and belong. I'm going to tell you a story, and it's kind of funny, but it's kind of not. But because here, Miss Drug Lady here, I took my daughter to get her teeth extracted, her wisdom teeth, over MEA. And so, you know, I'm going to be responsible about the pain pills they give her, and they wanted to give her 30 of them. I said, we don't need 30 of them. So I said, why don't you just cut that in half? And they looked at me like, are you sure? And I said, yes. I said, and I had mine out. I don't remember taking more than like one from, you know, maybe 24, 48 hours at the most. So this came back to bite us because she got 2 dry sockets. And I'm driving around on a Sunday night in St. Cloud, coming from my cabin with major drug-seeking behavior, looking for a pharmacy to give us that medication that she was out of, and nobody would. And so it was terrible. And so I kind of learned my lesson from that, because we had to get back there Monday morning and get that refilled. But that doesn't always happen. And I think, again, I would probably do the same thing, because we really, most of the time, don't need all of that medication. And I think as consumers, we have to be the ones to say that too. You know, don't always wait for your doctor. We think they know best, and they do. I mean, they have the medical degrees, but they're so used to just giving out these standard scripts. So it's okay to say, I don't need all 30 of those. So we have a number of our studies, the Monitoring the Future, the one done out of the University of Michigan. They're showing that over-the-counter drugs are among the most commonly abused drugs by 12th graders after alcohol and marijuana and tobacco. And it's been a little while, but I'm starting to hear a little bit more about cough syrups coming back into the picture a little bit more as far as over-the-counter drugs. I don't know if you're hearing much of that. I used to hear quite a bit of it, maybe about 10 years ago, but now I'm seeing it start to kind of filter back. I see you nodding. Are you seeing that too? It's made it a little bit more challenging for youth to get, but it's probably because parents are getting it. You know, and again, it's about access, because parents don't understand that that's something that some youth might gravitate towards. So when asked about how prescription opioids were obtained for non-medical use, more than half of the 12th graders, and this is still from the Monitoring the Future survey, told us that they just got them for a friend or relative. And again, we talked about, we think a lot of this is coming over the internet, and some of it is, but again, it's easily accessed just through friends, relatives, and neighbors. And again, people going into medicine cabinets, and even such things as when there's open houses and people going into the bathrooms and looking in medicine cabinets. I mean, there's all different types of ways that these medications can be accessible to people. So one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking to parents about is they always want to know, what are the warning signs? What should I be looking for? And they usually fall into 3 categories: the physical things that we can see, the behavioral things that we can see, and sometimes they're very subtle, and more of the psychological things that we may or may not be able to see as well. So I have parents focus on that. Now, one of the typical things that I think when we're dealing with situations in school, probably not seeing a lot of pill use in school, I mean, that I've been called to the office to help identify. It's typically marijuana. And the thing that I find in backpacks all the time is Visine. And I've never bought Visine in my life. I've never carried it. And how many of you are carrying Visine right now? We won't jump to any conclusions. I promise. I promise. So, you know, enough said. And as soon as they're swearing up and down that they're not smoking marijuana, but then the Visine falls out of the backpack, you know, that's giving us a little bit more glimpse into their life. And a few of us at school have become really, really good at being able to identify marijuana use. But one of the things, bloodshot eyes, dilated or constricted more than usual. They may have dilation and they may not, and some of that depends on how long they've been using, because kids can build a tolerance to marijuana use, and so some of these aren't always there. But typically I can just walk into a room, and especially if I know the person, and I know right away, you know, and it just has a look to it. And changes in appetite or sleep patterns, sudden weight loss or weight gain, these are things that we pay attention to in a school setting, and that I talk to parents quite a bit. Deterioration of physical appearance, personal grooming habits. Now, some of these seem like, okay, well, does this stuff really actually happen? Yeah, it does, because kids just, they're not taking care of themselves like maybe they did at one point in their life. The thing with alcohol and marijuana, kids with alcohol, we know that, you know, we know what drunk is. Kids come home, they're drunk, and parents can identify drunk. What they can identify is a child who was high earlier in the evening and then comes home, seems to be okay. They don't always associate their youth running to the fridge, you know, and feasting as anything other than, oh, must be hungry. You know, so these are the things that we have to teach parents, because that is a true physiological effect of marijuana use, you know, is having the hunger piece. Behavioral. Now, these are things that I know happen all the time, because these are the reasons why I'm getting the phone calls. It's when I have a parent call me, the first thing I do is I pull them up on our computer system, and I look at their attendance and I look at their grades, and it tells me the story. I see the story because the patterns are there. I can see where at one point the grades were what looked like to be that, oh, that child's, we just had a pop in the light there, that child's baseline grades to the decline, and you can actually see it. And so as the parent's talking to me, I pull this up and then I can see it. Many parents talk about, I don't know where my child is getting their money, but somehow they're getting it, and every now and then I notice that I had a 5 or a 10 stolen, or it's not there, or I thought it was there, and maybe I spent it, but I'm not sure, you know, and they start to play those games with themselves, and then they realize that it's probably being taken. Engaging in secretive behaviors, sudden changes in friends. Now, here's the thing that's interesting about this one. This is one of the things that I'm seeing. I do see that change in friends, but it's not always like that. Sometimes it's the childhood friends that teens have had since they were in kindergarten, and they grew up together, but they're going on that same path together of drug use. So it isn't always about, you know, the stereotypical, my kid changed peer groups. It's not always that. It's that they can have their same childhood friends, but they're all engaging in similar behaviors. Episodes of getting into trouble, see this quite a bit. So these are the behavioral things that are right in front of us that we typically see that cause us or cause a parent to respond, or law enforcement and criminal justice system, social services getting involved. Now, more of the psychological. These are the things that we may not see. They may be more subtle. And these are things with more mental health. And we know mental health can be very difficult to identify anyway. And then when we have kids using on top of that, it really makes it a challenge for us to try and figure out what's happening. But one of the things that I think stands out to me is anxiety, because that's something you can see a little bit more. Sometimes depression isn't always easy to see, but anxiety is, and it manifests in different ways. Our school experienced 3 suicides this year of young men, and all of them had either some type of mental health associated, maybe with other things. And so we've suffered some great losses in really trying to educate our community and our staff and our parents about what mental health looks like and what it doesn't look like, and how we can so easily miss it. And I know a lot of us in our communities are trying to deal with this issue of mental health and how tragic it is for us to lose kids. And so I knew one of them very well. I was connected to him for quite a few years, met him as a 9th grader, and he killed himself the day before school started in the fall. So the day before Labor Day, because he would have had to come back as a super senior and all of his friends were moving on, and I think that with other risk factors just got to him. Very, very sad about that loss, and I don't think that's something I'll ever forget. And I know that when I went to the reviewal and went into the funeral home, it was on a Friday night, I walked in there, and every child in there was on my caseload at one time or the other. Every child in there. And that just really, and I knew that, but collectively, when it's all in one room, it really hits you in a different way, because it's like, oh my, we have so many children and youth, you know, and all of us do, that are in trouble. And it's really just magnifies and doubles when it's all collective in one room. Very sad. And so some of what follows with this, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on this because this information is very easily available to us through different internet sites. I do have parents that often want to know what are some of the good sites to go to, and these are probably sites that you reference, but I use NIDA's, N-I-D-A, their website quite a bit, and that's www.nida.nih.gov. Excellent resource in any of SAMHSA's that you use. They have everything on there. Drugabuse.gov is an excellent website as well. Drugfree.org, excellent. And these are the ones that I give out to parents because they have great parent sections on how do you talk to your teen through all different stages on the continuum about, I'm just having suspicions about my child maybe starting to engage or thinking about engaging, to I really think that we need to look at treatment for my child. So there's everything in between there. So these are great websites to steer parents towards. And then it also really gives you what does marijuana look like for someone who's using it. Depressants, stimulants, inhalants. Okay, I want to talk a minute about inhalants because, again, this is something else that we see more regionally. I'm starting to hear more about inhalants again, but more specifically about the ones that kids are going to Walgreens, CVS, and some of the stores for computer spray cleaner. So I've actually called up our local CVS and I have told them, I know children are going in there to buy this and they're not using it to clean their computers. So that was news for them. Now, they still feel like they have to sell it, but I think they were going to talk about putting that behind the counter and trying to take note of, you know, how often they may be getting some return customers for that. So don't be afraid to call up your local employers and retailers and talk to them about a concern. And it's not putting them on the spot. It's not making them be defensive. It's just about something that they're probably not aware of. Because if a student's really hurting and they're really looking for a way out and to fill a void, they can be very ingenious as far as what they're looking for products. And it's usually what's most accessible and available to them. Inhalants are one of those. And hallucinogens, again, there is LSD floating around again. you know, that always seems to kind of come back and doesn't completely go away. It's still around. And of course the opiates and heroin. I don't know if you're working in a treatment center, you probably have seen what withdrawal looks like from painkillers. And I actually had a student in my office one day that was withdrawing from that, and everything up here is pretty much what I saw, to the point where you know, we were grabbing the trash can because I thought he was going to vomit. But this is pretty much everything here is what I was able to witness from his withdrawal. Except needle marks, that he didn't have those at the time. But Dr. Ken Winters, I'm sure you're probably familiar with him. He has really great approaches for parents that's very down to earth. And I don't want to use the word simplistic because that's not really what I want to get at, but he puts it in a way so that you understand it. It's not over scientific, but it's practical information. He has really great information on the teen brain. Dr. Ken Winters works out of the U of Minnesota. If you just Google his name, all of his information will come up. He has PowerPoints that are public domain. You can do some educating in your communities with that. Great information. So, and you can find this on his websites as well if you want to bring that up. But what I'd like to show you right now, again, is the incident that happened in Blaine, because it was really a wake-up call for a lot of us that didn't know much about these drugs. And this one actually was 2CE.
I don't know how I made it through that night. That's how scary it was.
Most intense trip I've ever had in my life.
It was just like a zoo in there. You felt like you got hit in the face with a metal bar.
My brain felt like it was melting.
Everything was shaking.
People were screaming,
Crying, I was trying to get people to calm down.
I think I went straight shot to hell.
Honestly, like, I think that's what dying would probably feel like. I should have just not done it. I should have just gone with my first instinct of not to do something like that. But then it's like everybody else was doing it and like whatever, and I was like, fine. Like a bunch of my really good friends are doing it, I guess I'll try it or whatever.
Since it was 2CE, like taking a little pinpoint is enough to get you pretty messed up. So doing that huge line was what made everybody freak out because it was way too much.
I've never tripped before, so Trevor told me not to, and then Timmy told me not to also, so I didn't do it.
Immediately after I snorted the line, I just knew that it wasn't going to be what I thought it was.
I just remember like somebody being like, Trevor's not okay, Trevor's not breathing, but like at that point, like nobody really knew what was going on because everybody was so like out of it.
I remember the only thing that really chilled Trevor out was me and Tim Lemire. We held Trevor down and we started like singing to him.
I said, you guys just need to call the cops. Cops need to come here. You know, this is not okay. And then that's when he hit the ground and he started like, almost looked like he was seizing, but it was like vigorous shaking on the ground and he was getting lifted off the ground from his own shakes.
I miss him every second of my life. Sad. Dumb drugs.
Trevor was the coolest kid I've ever met. I wanted to be him growing up. He was the kid. He was the kid everyone knew, everyone wanted to be. He was the cool kid. Like, Trevor was an amazing person.
It's like he's just away for a while and he's just gonna hit me up one day, but he's not really going to.
He was getting on the right path, you know, he didn't, just this thing just crossed his path and I don't know, something happened. I guess God needed a new angel.
I think about it every day, all the time, constantly, probably. I would never touch another drug. Like if we would have just been smarter and thought about what we were doing before we did it, like we still would have had our friend here. And like Timmy was our friend too. It's like we lost 2 of our friends that day then.
My remorse, like in a way I feel guilty for that night, even though people tell me I shouldn't and I know that I shouldn't, but there is a little guilt there always when I think about it.
That night gave me the strength to say, okay, I don't need this shit in my life anymore, you know? I mean, I'm not gonna tell people not to do drugs. No, they're not gonna listen to that. They're gonna do what they're gonna do. I would say don't take too many chances because you never know which use will be your last.
I just want to better my life after that and try to help other people better theirs and keep people away from doing the same stupid decision that he did, because he shouldn't have died. He should be here today. Just something that small can take something that big away from someone.
8 months later, I'm not over it. I can't get over it. I won't get over it. Like, I'm just not normal. And I really wish I could take that night back because it messed me up pretty bad. I go to therapy twice a week just to try and deal with it. It's not worth anything, like, to trip or to get high. Like, any of these people could die because of the stupid choice that you're making. Like, would you really want that to happen?
Welcome to the Star Tribune. I'm reporter Pam Lawaji, here to talk about a new wave of designer synthetic drugs that is sweeping through the streets of America. They were virtually unknown in early 2010, but now, several months later, state and local governments are scrambling to ban the substances. They are man-made stimulants and synthetic marijuana that have been packaged and sold as bath salts, herbal incense, and research chemicals. These drugs are earning reputations for inducing bizarre behavior and severe physical reactions. They've been linked or suspected in more than 20 deaths nationwide. Joining me today is Dan Morin, Assistant Special Agent in charge of the DEA's Minneapolis office, and Cody Weiberg, Executive Director of the Minnesota Board of Pharmacy. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Cody, synthetic drugs have sort of a Russian roulette aspect to them. Can you talk about that?
Yes, I think that's a very apt analogy. When you play Russian roulette, you have a gun with 6 chambers in it, bullets in one of them. You can pull the trigger several times and nothing happens, but one time you're going to pull the trigger and you're going to die. Same thing that can happen with these drugs. Even though you're using the same product with the same name and the same packaging, you don't know what's in there because the manufacturers have no quality control. They're not doing manufacturing to FDA standards, and they're sometimes not even putting the same drug in. So you can use the same product 4 or 5 times, have nothing happen to you. The last time you use it could be when you die.
Both of you have seen some of the bizarre effects that come up with these drugs, bizarre and dangerous effects. Talk a little bit about what's been out there.
Well, all of the drugs, even the synthetic cannabinoids, which a lot of people mistakenly think are no worse than marijuana, can have quite severe effects body-wide. There have been reports of seizures, of hallucinations and delusions, very aggressive behavior, irregular heart rates, things like vomiting and difficulty breathing. There was a 14-year-old down in Hastings who ended up in a coma after using a synthetic cannabinoid one time, ended up in a coma with very dangerously low levels of potassium, which affects your heart rate and your heart rhythm. And he was lucky he didn't have cardiac arrest.
You know, there's no shortage of stories across the United States. You know, from a national perspective, you know, certainly there's been violent outbursts in emergency rooms, people breaking through restraining gurneys and belts, trying to assault the doctors, the very people trying to help them. Certainly acts of self-mutilation. A woman in West Virginia who believed that she, after taking bath salts, that there was something underneath her skin, mutilated herself literally to death. Another man that was in Indiana climbed a flagpole adjacent to a highway and jumped off into incoming traffic. You know, these are all very bizarre acts by people that are taking these synthetic drugs.
We know that synthetics are popular partly because they don't show up on standard drug tests, and also because they're so widely available. Dan, maybe you can talk about how much the internet plays a role in that.
Well, I think the internet rapidly accelerated the flow of information on these drugs. What used to take years to cross the United States, you know, methamphetamine and some of the other designer drugs as they came across, now occurs in a matter of months, if not less, in a matter of weeks.
How has the internet in general changed the business of recreational drugs?
Well, I think it's increased both supply and demand. On the demand side, as Dan was mentioning, A lot of youth, a lot of young adults use social media. So when they are seeing Twitter feeds and they're seeing YouTube videos of other people their age using these drugs, I think they are more likely to use them themselves. On the supply side, you can order drugs from anywhere. Even if a site says that this is an American site and identifies an address, that doesn't mean that these products are coming from this country. We know they're coming from other countries, China, India, Russia. You know, you've got a lot more potential for a lot more people supplying the product.
What challenges do lawmakers have and law enforcement and the justice system have in trying to get around all this?
Well, there's certainly significant challenges with this class of drugs, primarily because they're chemists abroad. They can change just minute details molecularly about these drugs and alter the course of how they're interpreted under the legal process. DEA takes this very seriously, which is one of the reasons why we are placing a temporary order to ban, or at least schedule rather, 3 of the most predominant chemicals that we're seeing in the bath salts today, which is methadone, methylone, and then MDPV. It's for the human, for the public safety rather, that these are going to be placed on there to stop the imminent threat being placed by these dangerous chemicals.
You also have the law enforcement side. A lot of these are now criminal acts. Can we arrest our way out of this problem, though, with synthetics when they keep changing things?
I don't know that we'll ever arrest ourselves out of this. I mean, certainly the law enforcement component is a vital piece that needs to remain. You know, placing these items on the Emergency Schedule Act is certainly one thing that will change the manufacturer's process to try to avoid rather the new laws in the legal system that they'll have to overcome. Certainly the other aspect is through education and prevention. Cody and I think, share the very same opinion on this, that there has to be treatment, there has to be education, and it really starts at home. Having the parents let their children know that it may look legal on the internet and it may look like it's safe. That doesn't mean that it's either. What it does mean is that there's some people who are selling a drug that they don't know what they're selling for pure profit.
Besides talking to your own kids, what can parents do to look for warning signs?
I think check the internet. See which sites their children are visiting. If they see a suspect package arrive in the mail citing that it's plant food or that it's a bath salt, you need to recognize that these are not legitimate products. A legitimate product of bath salt can be purchased at a very inexpensive rate in a Bed Bath & Beyond, for instance, $15 for a 23-ounce container. The packages that are being sold, 200 milligrams at $20 a packet, equates to about a $64,000 bottle of bath salts. People need to recognize that that doesn't make sense.
Well, this is certainly an important topic that's been emerging very quickly. Thanks for joining us, gentlemen. For information, see the Star Tribune stories in print or go online at startribune.com/lethaldose.
All right, so I'd like to bring our conversation back to, I want to mention a little bit about school policies. Who's from schools here? See, okay. So let's have a conversation about what can be very effective and supportive policies. Because I think schools have a great opportunity to really help identify youth that need some help, and that we get them to treatment centers, and if they are already involved in the criminal justice system, that we're working with probation officers. I love having that relationship with POs and working together as a team for youth, because I think that's what's really important. Policies that we have at the district that I work with are both consequential and both educative, and trying to kind of merge those two together. So it's not heavy on the consequences, yet we're not turning the other cheek as well. So what we have done is set up kind of a tiered system, and on a first violation, and what we've done, and I don't know if other schools are doing this, so I'd sure love to hear from you, it doesn't matter to us if it's on campus or if it's off campus. So if they got picked up on a Friday night for a minor consumption and that report comes to law enforcement, they come to me, I'm bringing the student in, I'm calling the parent, and we're kind of figuring out what we need to do. Now with our school policy on a first offense, they have to attend a diversion program with me. if it's with alcohol. If it's with marijuana or other substances, Hennepin County has a contract with River Ridge Treatment Center, so in Burnsville they'll go and take their Diversion 1 class. So they have to do that. They can't get out of it and say, oh, I don't want to do that, or I don't want my kid to do that. That's something that they have to do. If they have a second one, it's written in our policy that, and again, it doesn't matter if it's on campus or off. If it's off, it doesn't matter. So they will have to have a chemical assessment, and it says right in our handbook that per their expense, that they will have a chemical assessment, and then that they will follow the recommendations. And can you imagine how parents react to that, or until they're used to those policies? But we've been doing this for so long that it's just become embedded into our school community with how we deal with it, and as well as our parents learning about it as well. Kids also lose their parking permit for 5 weeks, and that probably hits them the hardest. And part of that is, I mean, the other stuff, well, we'll do that, but the parking permit, that one hurts. And part of that is trying to teach them that this is a time for you to really examine what's more important to you. Because yes, you're paying for a parking permit, but you've also signed the application that says that you will not do this. And so you've broken that contract that you have with the school. And if this is your opportunity to really take a time out and assess where you're at and what you want to do. Okay, figure out what your priorities are. If you need a chemical assessment, this is a time to go do that and figure out. And we tell them, we do not want you driving high to school on our parking lot. So you really have to figure that out. What's more important, parking or the other? Yes?
So how is that worded on your parking permit?
The application, it just flat out says that they acknowledge that that they will not involve themselves in any drug use, alcohol, tobacco, or any other controlled substance use. And if they do, that they acknowledge that they'll lose their right to park in the school parking lot. So it's probably a little fancier, but that's basically what it says. Yes?
And that's on the first offense?
On the first. Yep, right away. Yes.
Well, by taking away the parking privileges, how many students decide not to come back to school?
None. Yeah. And even if they're from another district and they're there for open enrollment, tough. They have to find a way. Yes.
So back up one more step. You said that if a student gets picked up like on a Friday night, it's legal for the police department calls you?
It's not only, it's a state law that schools notify, law enforcement has to notify schools. And they have like a 14-day window to do that. Schools have 45 days to respond to that, that ticket, that information, that advisory. So it's an advisory. So with pre-assessment teams that schools have in place, or whatever they use as their mechanism, and we know that not all schools have positions like mine. We fully recognize that, but is there somebody in the building that is taking those in? And if they're not coming to your school, that's when you talk to your law enforcement and sit down and have a talk with the chief, that it's really important, because we have to know what our kids are doing, because again, what I said, what they're doing on the evenings and weekends really impact their educational environment and how they're performing in school. And so, and then on the third one, again, they have to have a chemical assessment and follow that. Now, if they have 3 on-campus violations, they are expelled. But we do things, we don't really want to throw away our kids. So yesterday, I just had a reentry meeting with a senior that we asked him, and this is going on 2 or 3 years of trying to work with this child. We said, you've been with us a long time. We don't want you to leave. This is what we want you to do. We want you to go to treatment. We want you to go have that assessment, which he had a few before and ignored recommendations. And then we will accept you back. We will work with you academically. We'll do back handsprings, whatever we need to do to get you back into our school and to graduate you, because that's what we want to do and that's what we're committed to do. So that's that piece that we extend to our students. We don't want to throw them away. And kids that are dealing on campus, that's an automatic expulsion. Automatic. And that's trying to give that message, though, that we're not going to have that happening on campus. It's not good for our school community, it's not good for our safety, and it's not good for anybody. Yes, question?
Expulsion from the school district or from that particular school? Would they go to the ELC?
It would be from, well, we only have one high school, and we also have an alternative on site, and that would include that as well. We will help set up additional education nearby. We will help with that and take that role on, but we stand pretty firm behind that piece.
Even the poor ninth grader who sold his milligram pill?
I should never say never. With the ninth grade boy, because we couldn't really prove it other than the fact that they admitted it, because other kids turned them in, we didn't. And so we're still working with them in their family situations. So we're not automatically going to do that, and especially with a ninth grader. And like I said, we didn't have that evidence other than, you know, someone telling us and reporting to us. So no, we did not do that in that situation. And we stand behind that as well. Because we want to work with that family and we want to work with that youth. You know, but still, we set up a culture of, you know, it's about safety for the kids, and we're not going to tolerate that. Question?
So then you get notified from the police.
Yes.
And you call the child and the parents in?
Yes.
It is my understanding that a child can, at age 16, refuse to have information released to their parents.
No. When they're 18, I mean, we would acknowledge that, but that's part of our policy and it's written in. Yeah, it's our policy, it's our school policy, and it's written in our handbook. So the parents will be involved in that process. Yes, and that's part of how we're trying to engage parents. And are they always real happy about that? No, but many parents are happy. They've been struggling for a while and they want someone to help them. You know, and some of them are saying, throw the books at them, do this, I wish you could put them in jail. It's like, no, that's not our role. It sounds like you've been having a lot of issues. You know, so we're trying to work with that. So trying to find that balance of that consequence plus that education and possible treatment is what we're trying to work on doing. And it is a balancing act all the time. And so the other piece that we're doing as far as putting the message out there is that we do, on a monthly basis, we do canine searches, and we mix it up between a private agency that comes in and does the search just with one canine, and then we'll also have, on the alternate months, we will have numerous police departments come in and bring a number of canines, anywhere from 5 to 10, because we have a huge building. And we do it kind of with a soft lockdown type of style where there's no movement, and we actually go into the classrooms, we remove the kids, they leave their backpacks there, phones, jackets, etc. And both of them have different types of effects on our student, the school community. When we have the police canines come in, that's really kind of more down to business, and they're trained differently. So it's like whoosh, you know, they're on the building. When we have the private company come in, that canine is trained very differently, and the approach is different with the kids. So we kind of mix up both, and we find that that works really well for us. And we'll also do the parking lot, and that's where we tend to find most of the things. And since we've been doing this for about 6 years now, 7 years, we have seen a decrease on-campus violations. So for a while you see an increase because of what you're doing, but over time the message is that we're not going to bring these into school. Ninth graders don't quite understand that yet, seniors do. You know, so it's made a huge difference in the amount. And I would say we've had at least a 50% decrease on-campus violations since we've started that process. And parents are accepting of that as well because they know it's a huge school. We think of a lot of our towns in Minnesota that are, you know, 2,000 and under. We can take those whole towns and put them in our building. And so, you know, it's about having a city within a building, and they're all about, you know, taking care of the safety. So that's one of the other things that's been really impactful, doing that with our policies. And it wasn't an easy thing. I brought it into our district, and it wasn't an easy thing at first, but the piece that you have to do is the education. You have to really let them know why. And it's that, and every year before we even bring the canines on campus, we show a video to all the students so that they know exactly what's going to happen and why we do it, and that we do it as a prevention technique. It's not a get you, because we don't want to catch them, because when we do, it's a whole lot of work for a lot of us. And I have to work with every single one of those kids. And I do not want to look at that as job security. So we reiterate all the time, it's about prevention. And again, it becomes part of your school environment, and then nobody's questioning it. So if you're really thinking about, we've had some school districts come in and just observe our process too and what we're doing. And so if any school here would like to do that, you're always welcome, to have that experience with us. But we found that very effective. We also have mental health services right in our school. We work locally with a local mental health agency from Minnetonka, and we have embedded them in taking, instead of writing kind of the local collaborative time study grants that we did for many years to have positions, the school district has taken over those positions so that we don't have to worry about the ebb and flow of those state monies to sustain these mental health services in our schools that we think are very important. So we're very fortunate that we're able to do that. We have one for our alternative program, and then we have another mental health professional that sees just kids generally in the building, and typically they may have some obstacle to reaching mental health services out in the community, be that financially, or maybe parents won't engage in that process with them. So that's been very helpful. Yes?
I like stats. So the percentage, kids that have untreated mental illness, what is the percentage of them that go to drugs?
This is the way I put it, and I would say that 80% of the kids that I see have a mental health comorbidity with another type of illness. And so the percentage is pretty high.
And when you say was it untreated?
Untreated, yes. And I would say some of them are being treated, like they may be on some type of medication, but it's not working, and they don't have the full approach going with therapy as well. And part of that is we all have to connect and work together. And sometimes what the therapist is seeing, we're not seeing, or they're not, vice versa, because there's not that communication. So we work really hard on that communication piece. One of the other things I wanted to talk about before I take some more questions, and this is a piece that I'm really trying to get information out today with parents and youth. I work on this all the time, is that there's a certain population of people, and we know marijuana is illegal in our state for everybody, but there's definitely a population that should stay away from marijuana, and these are people that are suffering with mental health, because the THC is like a fuel to their mental health symptoms. And anxiety is like a vicious circle, and they smoke and use marijuana because it makes them feel good, and then they get stuck in that and they can't get out. And so working really hard with that population is extremely important, and educating them on why they need more lifelong coping skills other than using marijuana to help alleviate those symptoms immediately. Because that's what we know is happening with a lot of our youth. They do not have these lifelong coping skills. And stress is alien to them, and they just become unraveled with that. Instead of recognizing that stress is something that is common to every single one of us, and how we address it and how we perceive it are things that are somewhat under our control, and that we need help from time to time with that. Very important things for kids to use. Oh, excellent.
What are 3 things you say to them to roll with it?
Well,
keep the conversation going.
Right. Part of it, I talk about what's the motivation behind continuing to use.
Say that again.
What is the motivation behind them to continue to use? And I also ask the question, do you see yourself using long term? And I ask them more too about the benefits. But not in addition to the benefits, are they seeing some of of the deficits as well to continuing to use. So those are the things I used to start off the conversation. I am so happy to be here with you today and share some information, and I hope that we can continue to work together. And I love the networking. The ambiance in here today was beautiful for a type of in-service like this today, and it looks like you had a great lunch. So thank you so much for being here.